Two cashiers mocked the shabby old man in the worn jacket the moment he walked into the coffee house, told him to take his drink and go sit on the curb where he belonged. And the man paid in cash, sat down in the corner, bit into a slice of banana bread, and froze halfway through the bite. He did not freeze because of the insults. He had heard worse a long time ago, in rooms exactly like this one, when he had been the shabby man for real and not by choice. He froze because of what the two of them said next, when they thought the old man was nobody and nobody was listening, leaning close across the register and laughing about the people they had decided did not deserve to be served. He set the banana bread down. He did not look up. He took out a cheap phone and typed a single word into it, and the word was rot. What the two cashiers did not know, what no one in that building knew, was that the shabby old man in the worn jacket had welded the first cart this entire company had ever owned, with his own two hands, 23 years ago in a friend's garage, back when he had nothing. That the motto printed on the very cup he was drinking from, the words "every hand builds something," were words he had chosen himself. That he owned the chair they had told him to get out of. His name was Keanu Reeves. And over the next 5 days, he was going to take a job in his own store, under a false name, and quietly find out exactly how sick the house he built had become. And when he was finished, 3 people were going to lose everything. One person was finally going to be seen, and a man who thought he had built a machine to protect himself was going to learn that some machines, once the light gets into them, only know how to come apart. Only know how to come apart. But to understand any of it, you have to understand Keanu Reeves first, and you have to understand the cup, and the words on it, and the friend who is no longer alive to drink from one. 23 years before this story, Keanu Reeves had nothing but a set of tools and a stubborn idea. He had come up working with his hands, a tradesman, a welder, the kind of man who is invisible at the edges of other people's nice rooms, and he had spent years being looked at the way you look at the help, and he had never forgotten how that felt. The particular cold of being treated like furniture in a place that was happy to take your money. He could have told you the exact moment the idea was born, because it was tied to his mother and to a cafe downtown when he was young. She used to take him there on the rare good days, when there was a little money, and she would put on her good coat, and the host would seat them every single time at the small table by the kitchen door, by the swinging door where the busboys came and went, and the light was bad, and the noise never stopped, never, by the window where the families in nicer coats sat in the sun sparred. His mother never complained. She would smooth the napkin in her lap and order a single coffee and make it last, and pretend the kitchen door was where she had wanted to sit all along. And Keanu, even as a boy, had understood exactly what was happening and exactly why, and had felt the heat of it climb his neck, the same heat he would feel decades later at his own counter, and had promised himself, with the furious clarity of a child who has watched his mother be made small, that if he ever built anything in his life, anything at all, there would be no kitchen door table in it. Everyone would get the window. He had a friend then, a man named Theo Marsh, who believed the same things he believed, and the two of them had an idea that sounded foolish when they said it out loud. They wanted to build a place where the people who got treated like furniture everywhere else could sit by the window. A coffee house, to start, because coffee was cheap to make and people needed somewhere to be. But more than a coffee house. Theo used to say that everyone is building something with their life, whether anyone notices or not. The single mother building a household out of double shifts. The old man building a routine that keeps him alive. The young worker behind the counter building a future one shift at a time. And that the tragedy of the world was how many of those builders went their whole lives without one seeing the thing they were making. And seeing the thing they were making. So the two of them welded a cart together in Theo's garage, and they opened it on a corner in Worker, where the nice chains would never go. And they printed 4 words on every cup. Every hand builds something. It was Theo's line. Keanu Reeves has never stopped thinking of it as Theo's line. The cart became a storefront. The storefront became 5. 5 became 40, spread across Colorado and into Utah and New Mexico. A company called Ironwood Coffee that people genuinely loved, known for beans, roasted by hand, and a seasonal menu that surprised people, and a feeling, in the good locations, that you were welcome there, actually welcome, not just tolerated until you finished your drink. And then, 8 years before this story, Theo Marsh had died, and Keanu had buried the only person who had built the thing with him. And he had done what grieving people who own companies sometimes do, which was to retreat upward into an office on a high floor of a glass building downtown, where the numbers were good and the board was happy, and he did not have to stand in a store and feel the absence of his friend in a place they had dreamed up together. The store. He had not pulled a shot of espresso in years. He had not walked into one of his own stores as anything other than a name on a letterhead in longer than he wanted to admit. He told himself the company was fine. He told himself the words on the cup were still true. He was about to find out that one of his 40 stores, the first one, the original, the one he and Theo had built with their own hands, had quietly become the opposite of everything those 4 words meant. It started with a folder. His operations chief, a sharp and loyal man named Ray Okonkwo, who had been with Ironwood for 15 years, and was one of the few people alive Keanu fully trusted, walked into his office on a Tuesday morning and set a folder on the desk and said, "You need to read these today." Inside were 31 printed reviews of the Denver flagship, the original store, all from the last 6 months, and Keanu read the first 3 and felt his stomach drop. They were not about the coffee. They were about being made to feel unwelcome. A 58-year-old woman wrote that the girl at the register had spoken to her, like she was a stray dog. A man wrote that he had been made to stand at the counter for a full minute, while the staff served everyone around him, and that he had left his drink on the table, and walked out and would never come back. The same words surfaced again and again across the reviews like a drumbeat. Unwelcome, ignored, embarrassed, humiliated. 22 of the 31 said some version of the same thing, which was not that the service was slow or the prices high, but that certain people were treated like they did not belong. Keanu pulled up the internal dashboard and found the number that made it real. The flagship store's customer satisfaction score was dead last out of all 40 Ironwood locations. The store he and Theo had built first, the one with the cart photo that ought to have hung on its wall, was now the worst store in the company. He called the store manager, a man named Craig Bissett, and asked him to walk him through it, and Craig's voice was smooth and rehearsed in a way that told Keanu more than the words did. "People leave bad reviews when they do not get free refills," Craig said. "It is noise. My team is solid. We are hitting our sales targets." "Your satisfaction score is dead last," Keanu said. "Sir," Craig said, "satisfaction is subjective. We cannot control how people feel." Keanu thanked him and hung up and sat looking at the phone for a long time, because he had heard that exact tone before, the smooth deflection of a man who has rehearsed his answer before the question is asked, and because he had spent his whole life on the other side of rooms, run by men who talked like that. That night, Keanu drove to the flagship alone and parked across the street with the engine off. And through the glass, he watched the last 20 minutes before closing. He watched a man in work clothes stand at the counter for nearly a full minute, while a cashier on her phone did not look up. He watched the way the staff moved, which was the way people move when they have decided that most of the people who come through the door do not matter. 40 stores, thousands of employees, and the one that was supposed to be the heart of all of it was rotting from the inside. And Keanu sat in his car outside a window he had once imagined people sitting happily behind, and he made a decision that Ray would try, the next morning, to talk him out of. He sat there longer than he meant to. The light inside was warm and gold, the kind of light he and Theo had argued about for an entire afternoon 23 years ago. Because Theo had insisted that the lighting in a room tells people whether they are welcome before a single word is spoken, and they had spent money they did not have on warm bulbs instead of the cheap white ones. And Theo had been right, almost everything that could not be measured. And Theo had been Keanu looked at that warm light now, falling on empty chairs and a floor that had not been swept, on a counter where a tip jar sat nearly empty. And he thought about how strange and terrible it was that you could get every visible thing correct, the light and the brick and the sign and the beans roasted by hand, and still have built, without noticing, a room with a kitchen door table in it. The table was invisible now. That was the difference. His mother had always known which table she was being given. The people this store was quietly pushing out did not even get told. They were just made to wait, and ignored, and slow served, until they decided on their own that they must have wanted to leave. It was the same cruelty his mother had absorbed in her good coat, but engineered now, made deniable, dressed up as nothing at all. And Keanu Reeves, sitting in the dark in his car, understood that he could not fix that from a high floor with a phone call, because the whole point of how it worked was that it did not show up on a phone call. You had to stand inside it. You had to be given the kitchen door table yourself. The easy thing, Ray said on the phone at 6 the next morning, is that we pull the security footage. We fire the 2 cashiers. We are done by lunch. If I fire 2 cashiers, Keanu said, I fix 1 shift. I want to know if the whole house is sick. He was quiet a moment. I am going in, not as the founder, as a nobody. And I need you to make sure that not one person in that building knows. There was a silence on Ray's end, the silence of a man who knows he is not going to win the argument. How long? Ray asked. Keanu said a week. And Ray, who had known him 15 years, said only, what name do you want to be? And Keanu thought about it and said Hank. Hank Mercer. A transfer from the Pueblo store. Build him into the system. Make him real. And so, 2 days later, a man named Hank Mercer, who did not exist, clocked in for his first shift at the Denver flagship of Ironwood Coffee, in a gray work polo and scuffed shoes and an old ball cap, with his beard trimmed uneven the way a man looks when he does not own a mirror he likes, and not one person looked at him twice, because he looked like exactly the kind of person this store had learned to look through. But before the first shift, there had been the first visit, the one as a customer, the one where it happened. And you should see that, because it is where the whole thing turns. Keanu had gone in plain clothes 2 days before Hank Mercer existed, just to see the store as a customer sees it, and he had stepped up to the counter and stood there while a young woman behind the register, whose name he would learn was Brooke Halloran, kept her eyes on her phone. A well-dressed young couple came in behind him, and Brooke's head came up instantly, bright and warm. Hey guys, welcome to Ironwood. What can I get started for you? And she took their order around Keanu as though he were a pillar, as though he were furniture, and the couple got their drinks and sat down, and Brooke went back to her phone. And Keanu stood there and waited. And quietly, excuse me, I would like to order. Brooke looked up and her eyes traveled from his cap to his jacket, to his shoes, slow and deliberate. The way you scan something you have already decided to throw away. What do you want? She said. Not a question, a verdict. A cortado, Keanu said, and a slice of banana bread. And Brooke tilted her head and turned to the other cashier, a young woman named Sierra Vance, and said, he wants a cortado. And Sierra snorted without looking up, and Brooke turned back and said, slowly, the way an adult speaks to a child. Who is not theirs, sir. Do you know what a cortado is? Or do you just want a regular black coffee? Keep it simple. And something climbed the back of Keanu's neck, an old heat he recognized from a long time ago. But he kept his voice level and said, I know what a cortado is. I would like one, please. Brooke shrugged and punched it in and took his cash with 2 fingers, like she was pulling a receipt off a wet floor, and dropped his change on the counter instead of into his hand. 3 coins, and they rolled. And Keanu picked them up one at a time while the 2 of them watched. He carried his cup and his banana bread to a corner table and sat down. The cortado was lukewarm. The banana bread was the best thing he had eaten in a month. And it occurred to him that he did not even know who had made it. And then he heard it. Sierra leaned across the register toward Brooke and did not bother to lower her voice because he was not worth the effort of discretion. Did you see him count those coins off the counter? She said. That was painful. Brooke laughed. "I do not know why people like that come in here," she said. "This is not a shelter. He is going to sit there all day, take up a table, buy one drink, never tip. At least he did not bring a whole crowd with him, like that mess last week. We need to filter better. Some people just do not fit the brand, you know." And Sierra nodded and said, "For real, we have to protect the vibe." Keanu set the banana bread down. His hand was steady. His jaw was not. There was a coffee ring dried into the table, in front of him that had clearly been there for days, that no one had wiped, in a store with his friend's words printed on every cup, and he took out the cheap phone and opened the notes and typed one word, rot. And then he sat there for another 45 minutes and watched. He watched Brooke greet every young, well-dressed customer like a friend, and hand an older man in a uniform his drink without a word or a glance. He watched Sierra turn away from an elderly customer to take a photo of herself. He finished the cortado, left the cup on the table, and walked out, and nobody said goodbye, and nobody said thank you, and nobody noticed he had gone. He stood on the sidewalk outside his own store, under the sign he and Theo had dreamed up, and he understood that the rot was not two rude girls having a bad day. The rot was a system, and he was going to take it apart from the inside. Now the 5 days, because the 5 days are where the truth comes out, one piece at a time. Day 1. Hank Mercer was put on the opening crew, and the shift lead was a woman named Daniela Reyes, 28 years old, her hair pulled back tight, her apron already stained by 5:15 in the morning, and she moved behind the counter the way musicians move on a stage, no wasted motion, every step deliberate, pulling shots and steaming milk, and restocking and wiping the bar, in a loop that never broke. To her, he was Hank, the new transfer who did not know where the lids were. Lids are under the second sink, not the first, she told him without looking up. First sink is sanitizer. Mix those up and you will taste bleach in the espresso for a week. At 6:40 in the morning, an elderly man came in, tall and slow-moving, a wool coat too heavy for the season, and Daniela's whole face softened. "Walter," she said, "oat milk cortado, extra warm." And the old man smiled like she had handed him something he had lost and said, "You remember." And she said, "Every day for 3 years, sit down. I will bring it to you." She carried it to his table with both hands. Walter looked up at her and said, "Daniela, you are the only reasons I still come here." And she smiled, and the smile did not reach her eyes, and she went back to work. Keanu waited for a gap between customers and asked her how long she had been there. And she said 4 years, and he asked if she liked it. And there was a long pause while her hands kept moving, and she did not look at him. And finally she said, "I like the coffee." That pause told Keanu more than all 31 reviews combined. He watched her work the rest of that morning the way you watch a craftsman, because that is what she was, and it is worth saying plainly what he saw, because it is the thing the whole store had been built to make invisible. Daniela Reyes was the best employee in that building by a distance that was not close. She knew every regular's order and every regular's name and the small adjustments that made a drink theirs instead of generic. The extra warm for Walter because his hands got cold. The half shot for the woman who came in shaking off a night shift. She kept the machine clean without being told, caught the oat milk running low before it ran out, fixed the grinder when it drifted without filing a ticket, trained every new hire in the small physical literacies of the job that no handbook contains, which sink is sanitizer, how to read the crema, how to carry 2 full cups in one hand without scalding your wrist. None of this was in any record anywhere. None of it generated a number that showed up on a dashboard 14 floors away. It was simply absorbed, the way the labor of competent people is always absorbed, into the smooth functioning of a place that then gives the credit to whoever is standing at the front, looking pleasant. Keanu had spent his early life being that kind of worker, the one whose competence is invisible. Precisely because it is so complete that nothing ever goes wrong, and he recognized Daniela the way you recognize a language you used to speak, and it made what was being done to her land harder than any single insult could have. At 10 in the morning, the shift changed, and the air in the store tightened like someone had turned a dial, because Brooke and Sierra walked in. Daniela went quiet and drifted to the back without being told, and started restocking shelves that did not need restocking. Brooke did not greet her, just asked if the oat milk was pre-stocked in a voice that expected it to be wrong, and Daniela said it was done, and Brooke said it better be. And then, like a switch flipping, Brooke turned bright and warm for a young couple who walked in, and Keanu watched her sell them the autumn maple cortado, telling them it was the best thing the store had ever made. And he filed away the fact that he did not know who had created it, and he was beginning to suspect he was about to find out. Day 2. Keanu opened the register drawer to get change for a customer and found, wedged in the bill tray under the receipt paper, a folded index card. And when Brooke went on break, he slid it out and looked at it. 2 columns, one headed with little drawn hearts, one headed with X marks. Under the hearts, tech guy Jake always tips 5. The girl from the boutique tags us online, give her an extra shot. Blonde couple, good vibe. Under the X marks, old guy Walter, just sits, nurses 1 drink. The loud group, do not encourage. Flannel man, does not fit. Flannel man was Keanu, the day he had come in as a customer. They had written him down. They had put an X next to his existence. And on the back, in Brooke's bubbly handwriting, was the instruction that turned it from cruelty into policy. If they are not brand fit, slow service, they will leave on their own. Do not make a scene, just make it clear they are not welcome. Keanu put the card back exactly where he had found it, his hand steady, his jaw not, because this was not 2 young women being unkind. This was a written system with a method designed to push certain human beings out of a store, one slow drink at a time. And it was operating under the words his dead friend had written. What got to him most was not the cruelty of the categories, but the bureaucracy of them. The way the card had been laid out in neat columns, maintained over time, added to, the way a person keeps any working document. Cruelty in a hot moment he could almost understand, the flash of contempt that a tired person fails to swallow. This was the opposite of a hot moment. This was cruelty that had been organized, written down, turned into procedure, handed off between shifts so that the next person would know to slow serve the flannel man too. It had a logic and a vocabulary. Brand fit, does not fit, protect the vibe, and the vocabulary was the worst part, because vocabulary is what turns a feeling into a policy, what lets a person do something ugly while believing they are simply maintaining standards. Keanu had spent his life on the receiving end of exactly this translation, the moment when someone's private disdain for him put on the costume of professionalism, and he knew how it worked from the inside of the kitchen door table, and seeing it here, systematized, in his own store, under Theo's words, was a particular kind of sickening that took him the rest of the shift to fold back down. That same day in the break room, he sat with Daniela on her break and watched her pull out a small worn notebook and flip through it. And the notebook was full of recipes, seasonal drinks, pastry ideas, flavor notes scribbled in the margins. Needs more cinnamon. Try brown sugar syrup. A whole private body of work. She stopped on a page, and he leaned over and saw the words Autumn, Maple Cortado, and he said, "You created this." And she nodded and said she had given it to the regional manager last fall, a man named Brant Keller, who said he would submit it through the regional process, and it went on the menu and sold like crazy. "Your name on it?" Keanu asked. "No," she said. He listed it as his own initiative. She turned more pages. Summerberry cold brew. Honey lavender latte. The banana bread he had been eating when they told him he did not belong. All hers. All credited to Brant Keller. "I stopped putting my name on them," she said, and closed the notebook. "What is the point?" And there was no self-pity in the way she said it, which was the thing that undid him. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. What is the point? Not as a complaint, but as a conclusion she had arrived at, honestly, and made her peace with. And that flat acceptance told Keanu how long it had been going on better than any date in any file could have. A person does not sound like that after a month. A person sounds like that after years, after the 3rd buried complaint, after the slow education that says the rules everyone tells you about, the ones about credit and fairness and your work being your own, are not actually the rules. That the actual rules are different and are not written down and are not in your favor. She had learned the actual rules. She had stopped writing her name on her own creations, not because she had stopped caring, but because caring had become a thing that only hurt. And she had filed the caring away the same place she filed the notebook, in her bag, on her own time, where no one could take it or laugh at it. And Keanu, under the table, typed into his cheap phone, Daniela Reyes, 4 recipes, 0 credit, 0 raise, and felt something cold and clear settle in his chest, the feeling of a man who has stopped being sad and started building a case. Day 3. Brant Keller came to the store, and Keanu smelled him before he saw him, cologne too sharp and too much, and the whole staff stiffened the way people stiffen around someone who controls their schedule and their future. Brant was 48, tall, tan, expensively groomed, and he walked into the store like he owned it, which was a particular kind of irony, given that the actual owner was standing 6 feet away in a gray work polo, learning where the lids were kept. Brant high-fived Brooke and called her the heartbeat of the store. He walked past Daniela, who was restocking cups 4 feet away, without a glance, as though she were a fixture in the wall. He noticed Hank Mercer and looked him over and said, "You are new, just stick with Brooke. She will show you how we do things here." And Keanu said, mild and curious, the way a new hire might, the seasonal menu whose idea was the maple cortado, and Brant grinned, wide and proud, and said, "That was mine, regional initiative last year." And 4 feet away, Daniela's hands paused for 1 second, and a cup tilted, and she caught it and kept going, and did not look up, because she had heard him say it before, and had learned what it cost to react. That was the day Keanu also learned about the tips. At the end of the shift, he offered to help count them, and Brooke shut it down instantly. "I handle the tips." He said mildly, "Store policy is an equal split, right?" And Brooke said, "Policy is policy. Real life is real life. The people up front earn the tips. Daniela is support staff. She gets a support share." And when Brooke stepped away, Keanu checked the point of sale system and saw the split. Brooke and Sierra taking 80% of the pooled tips. Daniela and 2 back-of-house staff, splitting the other 20 the same hours, a fifth of the money. And he photographed the screen. And he thought about the fact that the tip jar on the counter, a hand-painted ceramic thing with sunflowers on one side and the Ironwood logo on the other, was nearly empty, and that someone had taped a note to the front of it that read, "All tips go through Brooke. See her before adding to the jar." He stood looking at that jar for a while. After the others had gone, the sunflowers careful and a little faded, painted by a hand that had clearly taken its time. And he thought about the phrase support staff, the way Brooke had said it, the small administrative knife of it. Support staff. The woman who opened the store at 5 in the morning, who knew every regular by name, who had created the 4 best-selling drinks on the menu, who trained every person who would later be promoted over her, who caught the falling cup and fixed the drifting grinder and carried Walter's cortado with both hands, was, in the official language of the place, support staff, a category that existed mainly to justify paying her less of the money her own work brought in. Language again, always language. Brand fit, support staff, regional function. Every piece of the machine had a clean bureaucratic word that made the theft sound like an org chart. And the words were doing exactly what words like that are designed to do, which is to make a person disappear so smoothly that even the person begins to believe in their own smallness. Keanu had a sudden, vivid memory of his mother smoothing her napkin at the kitchen door table, performing contentment with the seat she had been given, and he understood that the napkin and the supportsterfoscher were the same gesture seen from opposite sides. A person being told where they belonged and being expected to be grateful for the telling. Day 4. A woman came in, around 2 afternoon, mid-50s, still in hospital scrubs with a lanyard around her neck, and ordered a vanilla latte, and Brooke served her with the dead eyes and flat voice she saved for everyone without a heart next to their name, and wrote the wrong name on the cup. The woman's name was Patrice. The cup said Pat. "Excuse me," the woman said, "my name is Patrice, not Pat, And Brooke did not look up and said, "Same thing." And Patrice took her coffee and sat down and took one sip and stood up and walked out. And Keanu followed her and found her on the bench outside, holding the cup, looking at it. He sat down beside her and asked if she was all right, and she looked at him with eyes that were tired in a way that had nothing to do with one bad afternoon and everything to do with a lifetime of them. And she said, "I just wanted a cup of coffee in a nice place. That is all." And Keanu felt his chest tighten, and he said, "You deserve that." And Patrice almost smiled and did not quite get there. And she dropped the cup in the trash and walked away, and Keanu sat on that bench for a long time, and then took out the cheap phone and texted Ray. "It is worse than I thought. One more day, then legal, HR, and a room with every employee in it. Friday morning. Day 5. Before dawn, Keanu came in at 4:30 with a corporate login that Ray had set up to look like a routine audit. And he sat in the cramped, windowless manager's office, behind the break room with the squeaking chair and the printer that had not been serviced since the store opened. And he pulled the whole truth into the light, one file at a time. There was something fitting, he thought, about the room. The store had an Instagram-perfect front, warm light and clean lines, and a chalkboard with careful lettering. And then there was this. The actual nerve center. A windowless box that smelled of old coffee and dust, with a chair that squeaked and a chipped door, and a printer held together by neglect. And the gap between the two told you everything about where the company's attention had gone. You could measure the health of any operation, Keanu had learned a long time ago from Theo, not by how the front looked, but by how the parts no one photographs were treated. The break room, the back door, the bathroom the staff used, the chair in the office where the truth was kept. By that measure, this store had been telling anyone willing to look, for a long time, exactly what it had become. The tip records first. 12 months. Brooke and Sierra's combined weekly tips averaged $410. Across all 40 Ironwood locations, the average two-person front-of-house split was 95. 4 times higher, not a little more. 4 times. And Daniela Reyes' tip share had decreased every month for 9 straight months, from $62 a week down to $11, over exactly the period since Brooke had joined the staff. He screenshotted every page, and he did the arithmetic on what $11 a week instead of $62 meant over 9 months, to a person who was clearly counting every dollar. And the number was small enough to be insulting, and large enough to be a car repair. A month of groceries. The difference between a hard month and an impossible one. And he sat with that smallness for a moment, because the cruelty of it was precisely in the smallness, in how little they had bothered to steal, in the fact that they had degraded a person's whole sense of worth over a sum that meant nothing to the people taking it. Then, Brant Keller's quarterly innovation reports, pulled from the regional shared drive. 4 menu initiatives over 14 months, each credited to Brant as the originator. Autumn Maple Cortado, submitted in October. Summer Berry Cold Brew, submitted in June. Honey Lavender Latte, submitted in December. The Banana Bread, submitted in March. And then Keanu opened the photographs he had taken of Daniela's notebook, page by page, and matched the dates. Every single appeared in Daniela's notebook exactly 2 months before Brant submitted it as his own. Every time. The same 2-month gap, just long enough to look like independent development, just short enough to ride her creativity in real time. 4 ideas, 4 bestsellers, all hers, all stolen. Then the complaint log, 3 formal complaints filed by Daniela Reyes over 18 months. One about schedule fairness, asking to be rotated into peak hours. Reviewed, no adjustment needed, signed Brant Keller. One about the tip distribution, asking for a transparent audit. Reviewed, tip policy is at store discretion. No action, signed Brant Keller. One asking for formal credit for the 4 recipes she had created. Reviewed, menu development is a regional function. No further action, signed Brant Keller. 3 complaints, 3 dead ends. The same signature on everyone. The man she was complaining about signing the dismissal of every complaint against himself. Keanu read them twice. And what struck him the second time was not the dismissals, but the fact that she had kept filing them. 3 times, knowing each time how it would go, she had sat down and written out, formally, in the company's own language, "This is happening to me, and it is wrong," and sent it up into a system that she must have known by the second time was going to bury it. That was not naivety. He understood, reading them, that it was the opposite. She had been building a record. She had been leaving evidence for a future that might never come, documenting her own erasure on the chance that someone, someday, would go looking, and the someone had finally come. In a worn jacket, 5 days deep into a job he did not need. And her 3 buried complaints were waiting for him exactly where she had left them. And then the last file, Brooke Halloran's employee record, and Keanu scrolled past the hire date and the tax forms to the emergency contact field, and read the name there, and exhaled slowly, the way a man breathes when the final piece of something ugly clicks into place. Emergency contact Brant Keller. Relationship uncle. Brant was Brooke's uncle. Brant shielded Brooke. Brooke ran the floor. Sierra followed Brooke. Daniela filed complaints, and Brant buried them. Brant stole Daniela's recipes, and Daniela had no one above Brant to report to. A closed loop. A machine built to protect itself, running quietly inside the company Keanu had built to do the opposite. He walked out to the break room and picked up the hand-painted tip jar and turned it over. And on the bottom, in small faded letters, it said, "For the team," and 2 initials, D. Our Daniela had painted it herself, for the team, and the team she had made it for had emptied it and shelved it and taped a note to it, routing every dollar to the person who's stealing from her. Keanu set it back down gently, the way you set down evidence, because that was what it was, and he called Ray and said, "Set up the room, every flagship employee, 8 in the morning, and put a screen in it, because I am going to show them something." "What are you going to show them?" Ray asked. "The truth," Keanu said. Friday morning, 8 o'clock. The store closed to customers. Every employee in the windowless meeting room behind the floor. 14 plastic chairs in rows under buzzing fluorescent lights. Brooke in the second row with her phone, annoyed at the mandatory meeting. Sierra beside her, chewing gum. Brant Keller in the front row with his legs crossed and his arms spread across the chairs on either side of him, his cologne filling the room before any voice could. The posture of a man who believes he is the most important person in any space he enters. And Daniela Reyes in the back row, hands folded, shoulders forward, not knowing why she had been asked to come, expecting nothing, because nothing was what this place had given her for 4 years. At 2 minutes past 8, the door opened, and Keanu Reeves walked in, and he was not in a suit. He was wearing the same gray work polo and scuffed shoes and worn jacket he had worn for 5 days behind the counter. He walked to the front of the room with no notes and no laptop, just himself, and he let the silence hold for a long moment, and then he spoke. "5 days ago," he said, "I walked into this store and ordered a cortado and a slice of banana bread, and the 2 cashiers behind the counter looked at me, an old man in a worn jacket, and decided I did not belong. One of them told me to take my coffee and go sit on the curb. The other said I had crawled out of a trash can and that my card was probably stolen." Brooke's smile froze somewhere between performance and panic. The room had gone very quiet. "My name is Keanu Reeves," he said. "I started this company 23 years ago. I welded the first cart with my own hands, in a garage, with a friend who is gone now. I built this store." And the color went out of Brooke's face all at once, the way water leaves a glass when it tips. He took the index card out of his jacket and held it up. "This was in the register drawer," he said. "Hearts and X marks. Hearts for the customers you decided were worth being kind to. X marks for the ones you decided were not." He read from it. "Old guy Walter, just sits. Flannel man does not fit." He set it on the table. "Flannel man was me. You put an X next to the man who built everything you were standing in." And he turned to the screen, and 1 slide at a time, he laid the whole machine bare. The tip data, 80% to 2 people, the same hours, a fifth of the money to everyone else. Daniela's notebook on one side of the screen and Brant's reports on the other. The dates circled in red, 2 months apart every single time. The 3 complaints, all filed by Daniela, all dismissed, all signed by the same hand. And then the last slide, the emergency contact field, the word uncle. And the room understood all at once exactly what it had been living inside. He did not rush through the slides, and he did not raise his voice, and the not raising was somehow worse, because it meant none of this was a surprise to him anymore. It was simply being read into the record. When he put up the tip numbers, he explained, plainly, for the room, what they were looking at, that a pooled tip is not a gift to whoever happens to be standing at the register, that it is, by the store's own written policy, and by the law in most of the ways that matter, the shared property of everyone whose work earned it, and that quietly diverting 80% of it to 2 people was not a quirk of the schedule, it was the taking of money that belonged to other people. When he put up the recipe dates, he let the 2 columns sit there long enough for everyone to do the arithmetic themselves. The notebook entry in August, the corporate submission in October, the same 2-month gap 4 times in a row. A gap that was not coincidence but craft, long enough to look like independent work, short enough to harvest her ideas while they were fresh. And when he put up the 3 complaints, he read the disposition on each one aloud. Reviewed, no action. Reviewed, no action. Reviewed, no action. And then he read the signature. And then he was quiet and let the room sit with the particular sickness of a person being told to report her mistreatment to the man mistreating her. A sharp inhale came from somewhere in the middle rows, and 2 employees exchanged a look that said they had known something was wrong for a long time and had never been able to name it. And that was the look Keanu had come for, more than the panic on Brooke's face, because that look was the whole company's conscience finally being handed the evidence its instincts had been begging for. And here is where this story refuses to give you the easy ending. Because Brant Keller did not crumble. Brooke crumbled. Sierra crumbled, her chin trembling, her eyes red. But Brant Keller's face did not drain like his niece's. It hardened. His eyes went narrow and started moving, left and right. Not the eyes of a man confessing, but the eyes of a man calculating, a man running out of exits and checking the room for windows. When Keanu finished, Brant did not apologize. He uncrossed his legs and he said, in a smooth and reasonable voice, that there had been a misunderstanding, that the recipes had been collaborative. That menu development was always a regional function, and Daniela had simply contributed to a team effort, that the tip policy was within store discretion and perfectly legal, that he resented the implication that he had given 14 years to this company and would be speaking to his own attorney about being ambushed and defamed in a room full of his subordinates. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Keanu with the flat confidence of a man who has always, his entire life, been able to talk his way out, and he said, "You can dress up like a barista and play games, but you cannot prove intent." And he walked out, and the door clicked shut behind him, and his cologne hung in the air after he was gone. And Keanu let him go, because he already understood something about men like Brant Keller, which was that they do not stop. They never simply absorb a loss. They counterattack, and the counterattack is always the thing that finally destroys them, because it is the thing they cannot do quietly. He fired Brooke and Sierra that morning, in that room, with the specific charges read aloud, not for being rude, but for maintaining a documented system of discriminatory profiling, for manipulating the tip pool, for building a hostile environment for the colleagues who did not fit the brand they had decided to enforce inside a company that was never theirs to reshape. Brooke would not look up. Sierra held her folder like she did not know what to do with her hands. And then Keanu turned to Daniela Reyes in the back row, and his voice changed, the steel of it softening by a single degree. And he told her that he owed her an apology, not for what the others upwards had done, but for not being there to see it. For being 14 floors up while this happened 14 feet from the counter, and that this was on him. And Daniela pressed her lips together, and her eyes were bright, not spilling, just bright. And she nodded once, slowly, not in agreement but in acknowledgement, the look of a person who had known exactly what she was worth and had been waiting, for 4 years, for someone else to finally see it. He offered her the job that afternoon. Regional Innovation Lead. Seasonal menu development for all 40 stores. Her recipes credited to her retroactively. Her name going onto the menu boards, and the marketing. Her salary backdated to the date of her first stolen recipe. A back paycheck for 18 months of diverted tips, calculated to the cent. He slid the folder across the table, thicker than the ones he had handed the others, and Daniela stood and walked to the front. No rush. Every step deliberate, the way she moved behind the bar. And she opened it and ran her thumb across the new name badge. Inside, Daniela Reyes, Regional Innovation Lead. The way you touch something you have imagined 1,000 times. And never let yourself believe you would hold. And she turned to the room and said 2 words, thank you, quiet and steady. Not grateful the way people are when they are given a gift. Grateful the way people are when something stolen is finally returned. And nobody clapped, because nobody needed to. But Brant Keller was not finished, and neither was the story, because the counterattack came exactly as Keanu had known it would. Over the following days, while Keanu was rolling out reforms across all 40 stores, transparent real-time tip pooling that no one person could control, automatic credit and a royalty to any employee whose recipe went on the menu, an independent complaint line that reported to a third party instead of to the regional manager, and quarterly undercover audits so that no store to work the only again rot in the dark. Brant Keller went to work the only way he knew how. The reforms were not complicated, and that was the part that bothered Keanu most when he finally wrote them down. Because none of them required genius or money, they only required someone to have been paying attention. Transparent tip pooling was a single change to software the company already owned, a screen every employee could see, the math done automatically by hours worked, no human hand on the lever. Recipe credit was a line on a form and a clause in a contract. An independent reporting channel was a phone number that did not route through the person most likely to be the problem. Undercover audits were just the discipline of occasionally standing inside your own store as a stranger. The thing Keanu had stopped doing for years and would never stop doing again. Every one of them was obvious in hindsight, and every one of them had been missing, and their absence had not been an accident exactly, but it had been a kind of negligence. The negligence of a man who had assumed that, because he had written good words on a cup, the good words would enforce themselves. Theo used to warn him about exactly this in the early years, when it was just the 2 of them and a cart. Good intentions, Theo said, do not survive bad management. You have to build the intention into the machine, or the machine will quietly replace your intention with its own. Keanu had forgotten that, somewhere 14 floors up, and it had cost Daniela Reyes 4 years, and he was not going to forget it again. He did not accept the loss. He tried to bury it. He reached out quietly to people he thought he still controlled. He contacted Sierra Vance and offered to make her landing soft if she would sign a statement saying that Hank Mercer, the new hire, had coached her and Brooke into their behavior, that the whole thing had been entrapment by a vindictive owner. He pressured a friend in the regional office to quietly alter the submission dates on the old recipe reports, to make it look as though his filings had come before Daniela's notebook entries instead of after. He let it be whispered to a couple of industry contacts that the founder of Ironwood had gone unstable since his partner's death and was staging humiliations of loyal employees for attention. He was doing what men like him always do, which is to try to spend and lie and pressure his way back to the version of reality where he was the reasonable one. It had always worked before. It did not work this time, and the reason it did not work is the reason the whole thing finally came down on him, far harder than the meeting ever could have. Because every person Brant reached out to had just watched or heard exactly what he did to people who would not protect him. Sierra Vance, holding the offer in her hands, thought about the index card and the word filtering, and the way Brant had let his niece run the floor while everyone else was furniture. And she did not sign his statement. She took it to Ray Okonkwo and told him everything, including the offer itself, which she had been smart enough to keep in writing. The friend in the regional office asked to falsify dates, refused, and forwarded the request. And the request itself, the documented attempt to alter records, was a far worse crime than the original theft, because the original theft could always be argued, reframed, called collaboration. But a written instruction to backdate a corporate filing could not be called anything but what it was. And when the company's lawyers began pulling on that single thread, the attempt to alter the records, it did not stop at the records. It did not stop at the flagship, because Brant Keller had been a regional manager for years. And once investigators started looking at the pattern, they found it everywhere. Other stores. Other employees whose ideas had quietly become Brant Keller's initiatives. A barista in Salt Lake City whose cold brew formula had won a regional award with Brant's name on it. A baker in Albuquerque whose seasonal pastry had carried the company through a slow quarter and earned her nothing but a line in Brant's report. Other complaints that had died on his desk, a whole filing cabinet of them, a graveyard of people who had tried to say this is not right and been told, in the language of reviewed and no action required, that they were mistaken about their own lives. A tip arrangement at 3 other locations that began to look less like store discretion and more like something a forensic accountant would eventually have a precise word for. The meeting had been about 1 store and 3 people. What Brant Keller's counter-attack detonated was an investigation into a decade and a region, and the deeper it went, the worse it looked, because it turned out the flagship had not been the exception. The flagship had simply been the place where the machine had gotten careless enough to put an X next to the owner. And the machine that Brant had built to protect himself came apart the way those machines always do, once the light gets into them, all at once after holding for years. He was terminated for cause. The falsified record attempt and the pattern it exposed turned what could have been a quiet firing into a matter for lawyers and, eventually, for charges, fraud, and the unlawful retaliation against the employees who had tried to report him. His name attached in the public record to the exact words he had spent a career making sure never touched it. The company faced its own reckoning, too, a wave of claims from people Brant had wronged over the years. And Keanu did not fight a single one of them, because they were true, and because a company that prints every hand builds something on its cups, and then lets some man spend a decade stealing the things hands built, does not get to act surprised when the bill arrives. The contacts Brant had whispered to went silent and then went away, because the entire value of those relationships had been their deniability, and there was nothing deniable left. The smooth confidence that had carried him out of that meeting room curdled into the particular panic of a man who has finally met a problem he cannot talk his way out of. And he spent it alone, because the people he had protected and the people he had used had all, in the end, turned the same direction, which was away from him. There was a night, weeks later, when it was all coming down, that Brant Keller sat alone and did the thing such men almost never do, which was to see himself clearly, and it did him no good at all, because by then it was far too late. He thought, for the first time, about Daniela Reyes, about 4 years of her ideas wearing his name, about the notebook he had written quarter after quarter, about how good she actually was, better than he had ever been at anything, and how completely he had needed her to be as invisible so that he could be visible. And he understood, alone with nothing left to protect, that he had spent his career standing on people more talented than himself, and calling it leadership. He never apologized to her. Some part of him understood correctly that an apology at that point would be one more thing he was taking from her, one more demand on a person he had already taken 4 years from. And so the single decent instinct he had left was to spare her the performance of his guilt and carry it alone. Which is the only thing he ever did that was not about himself, and it came years too late to count. Keanu Reeves never took any pleasure in it. He had been the invisible man at the edges of enough rooms to take no joy in watching even a man like Brant Keller go down. He had done only one thing that was a choice rather than a necessity, which was the 5 days, the decision to learn the truth from the floor instead of firing 2 cashiers from a high office and calling the house clean, and everything else had simply been the natural consequence of Brant Keller colliding with a truth he could not bury, which Keanu had not created, only refused to look away from. 3 months later, the Denver flagship did not look different from the street. Same brick, same glass, same sign. But inside, everything had changed. There was a chalkboard by the door now, lettered by hand and updated every week in Daniela Reyes' handwriting, this season's menu, created by our team. And every drink had a name beside it. Not a corporate code, a person, the autumn maple cortado, and the honey lavender latte with Daniela's name, and 2 new drinks with the names of baristas in other cities, because the credit was real now and it traveled. The hand-painted tip jar sat front and center on the counter where customers could see it, repainted, the sunflowers bright, and it was full, not with spare change but with folded bills, because the people behind the counter knew the customers by name now, and the customers knew them back. Daniela had peeled the old sticky note off it on the first day, the one that routed every dollar through Brooke and dropped it in the trash, and set the jar where it belonged. The team was different. Keanu had not gutted the staff, he had removed the rot and let the rest grow, and the new hires came through Daniela, whose only requirement was that they actually liked people, all people, not just the ones who looked good in a photograph. One of those hires was Patrice Dunn, the nurse from the bench, the one who had been called Pat and walked out with a coffee she did not want. Keanu had tracked her down through the feedback form no one had ever answered, and called her himself and told her what had changed, and then asked if she would ever want to work there. And she had laughed the kind of laugh that sits on the edge of crying and said, "You are serious." And he had said, "I want to build the place you wanted to walk into, and I think you would be better at it than anyone I could find." She worked the front register now, the spot Brooke had guarded like a throne, and she greeted every single person who came through the door the way Daniela had taught her. Eye contact, the right name on the cup, the drink handed over with both hands. And Walter Pike came back. He had stopped coming after the slow service and the waiting and the message it was meant to send. But one Tuesday, at 6:45 in the morning, the old man came through the door in his wool coat. And he stood at the counter and looked around like he was checking whether it was safe. And a new barista looked up and smiled and said, "Oat milk cortado, extra warm, you're Walter, right?" And Walter said, "How do you know my name?" And the barista said, "Daniela told us about you. You're at the top of the list." And Walter laughed, short and surprised, the sound of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be expected somewhere. He sat at the window table, the one the index card had said he did not deserve, and when he left, he put a $5 bill in the sunflower jar and tapped the rim twice. The way you knock on a door you are glad is open. There was a list now, an actual one, but it was the opposite of the index card. Daniela had made it her first week as innovation lead, and it had no hearts and no X marks. It just had names and the things that made each person's visit theirs. The extra warm for the cold hands, the corner table the writer liked, the quiet of the early hour an anxious customer needed. It was the same impulse as the old card, the recording of who people were, turned exactly inside out, used now to welcome instead of to filter. And the difference between those two lists, Keanu thought when Daniela showed it to him, was the entire difference between the company he had meant to build and the thing it had quietly become in one store. The same attention pointed in opposite directions toward a person or against them, and nothing in between. The losses stayed losses, the way they do. Daniela had still lost 4 years, and no back paycheck returns 4 years. And the particular exhaustion of being invisible for that long does not lift all at once, just because someone finally looks. Some of the staff who had watched it happen and said nothing had to live with having said nothing, and a few of them could not, and left. And Theo Marsh was still gone, and that was the loss underneath all the others. Because the whole reason the words on the cup mattered so much to Keanu, the whole reason the rot in that store had felt like a wound, and not just a management problem, was that those words belonged to a man who was not alive, to see them betrayed, or to see them made true again. And no reckoning on any Friday morning brought Theo back to drink 1 cup in. He had dreamed up. Some things do not get fixed. They only get honored. Keanu visits the flagship once a month now, always through the front door, always as a customer first. On one visit, he noticed something new on the wall. A framed black and white photograph. 2 young men in their 20s standing beside a welded coffee cart in a garage, grinning like they had just built something that mattered. And below it, a small plaque with 4 words on it. Every hand builds something, and the names of 2 founders, one of them no longer living. He asked Daniela who had put it up, and she gave him a shrug that was lighter than the shrugs she used to give, and said, "The team, they thought people should know where this place came from." And Keanu ordered a banana bread and a cortado, and Patrice handed him the cortado with both hands. And Walter was at the window table, and Daniela was in the back where the work was, and he carried his cup to the corner table, where he had sat 5 days as a stranger and frozen halfway through a bite. And he sat down, and this time he finished it. I keep going back to the tip jar, not the slides, not the firing, not the reforms across 40 stores. The cheap ceramic jar with the sunflowers, the one Daniela Reyes painted by hand and signed on the bottom for the team. I keep thinking about what it means that she made that. That after they gave her the dead shifts and stole her recipes and took 80% of the money she helped earn, she still sat down one evening and painted sunflowers on a jar for the people who were doing it to her. Because some part of her refused to let what they were be the final word on what she was. They had power over her schedule. They never once had power over her worth. And the jar was the proof, sitting on a shelf in the back the whole time, signed on the bottom where no one bothered to look. That is the part that stays with me. Not that a man went undercover and caught the people stealing. That a woman kept painting sunflowers for a team that did not deserve them, and was right to, because the team she was really painting them for had not arrived yet. And when he finally did, in a worn jacket, counting coins off a counter, she was still exactly who she had always been, waiting to be seen. While this story is fictional, the lessons about how easily we decide who a person is before they have said a word, and how much we miss when we are wrong, are very real. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.